Canine Chat. News, tips, expert guests and reviews. Whether you're a trainer, handler or just want to learn more about your best friend, here's Paul the Dog Trainer with Canine Chat. The following podcast may have information relevant to you. However, it's based on the knowledge and experience of those involved. For advice more specific to your situation, please consult a professional.
And welcome back to Canine Chat Episode 4. I'm your host, Paul the Dog Trainer. Today we're going to be talking about recall and leadership with a very close friend of mine and fellow dog trainer, Jimmy from Jimmy's Dog Training. Welcome to the line, Jimmy.
Thanks, mate. How you doing?
Oh, good. Thanks. How are you?
Doing well.
Thanks for joining me today. I thought you'd get you on the line today to talk about some things that are quite prevalent in the dog training industry or the world at the moment, which is recall, coming when called, and also leadership with your dog. So what do you think? What do you think the most important thing about recall is?
Recall. Well, it's I guess there's a lot of things really. I mean, you could kind of divide it. I guess is probably the best way to do things into your tools and then your techniques, I guess. So, I mean, the best place to start always is with a really good treat. And I mean, that always depends on if your dog is a food oriented dog or a treat oriented or even just praise driven. You know, that's always a good way to do it as well. But you need to figure out what they like, and then if they do like treats, you know, all my guys are really food oriented dogs, so it makes my job a whole lot easier. But I use things like hot dogs or sliced ham or, you know, little bits of meat that's soft and quick to go down. All those sorts of things are really, really good. And then, you know, the techniques in which you're using, whether you're using vocal commands or you're going to do hand signals and things. I have a few people with, you know, deaf dogs that need to figure out things like that. So two places to start are always good with that.
I think it's important to find what your dog's motivation is. With recall specifically, I talk about this a little bit with my clients. We talk about competitive motivations. And what a competitive motivator is the motivation that you have in your pocket or what your dog perceives as motivation versus the motivation of what they're currently doing. So if your dog is playing with a few other dogs and you call them back to you and your motivator is not as good as the motivation of playing with the dogs, they're never going to come back. So you have to make sure that your motivator is always higher than what the dog is doing currently to ensure they come back every time. And a lot of people get into the habit of forcing a treat down the dog's throat, thinking that it needs to have some sort of liver treat. Whenever, like with trained recall with my dogs with a tug toy, that's much more important. And for Holly, my Kelpie, actually, I trained her with a tennis ball. It's much better because she'll come back every single time. What do you find with your clients specifically that the biggest thing they're doing? I don't want to say incorrectly because some people just don't know what to do. But what do you think some of the downfalls or some of the things that people need to improve on through your client?
Well, I think one of the main things is that we, you know, I mean, to break it down, and I mean, I could talk for hours on all of this stuff, but really you have to think about what things the dogs are using to take in the world. You know, you've got the nose, the eyes, and the ears. So basically, a lot of people just use their sound to try and get the dog back, for instance. So if their nose is stuck into the ground and they're sniffing away, and they're pretty interested in what's going on down there, whether it be food or a scent or whatever it is, the people are just standing there basically yelling and in turn desensitizing themselves to the sound, or the dog to the sound of them calling them back. And, you know, they sort of say, well, why doesn't come back? I'm calling, you know, and we have to sort of affect a couple of senses, if you will, you know, the eyes and the ears, or, you know, try and do something a little bit different if you're not having a test. But I find a lot of the times people use a lot of vocal commands, and they are important, obviously, with the recall. You have to get their attention somehow, but you have to work to get that reaction happening. You know, that's really the first thing. And people, you know, the best place to do this is usually to start from shorter distances. A lot of people want to do those 100-meter recalls or you know, get them as far away as you can get and all those sorts of things. But I always say if they're 10 meters away, there's 10 moments to be distracted on the way back. So, you know, you got to start small and then start to build it up. I always find that's the best way to practice.
I find with recall, a lot of people try and use recall with a dog and they try and train it with a dog that may be 100 meters away. You know, they don't start small, or they simply expect the dog to recall because it knows its name. What I try and teach my clients is you use the name to get their attention, and once you have their attention, you use the recall command exactly the same as you would ask a dog to sit or stand or lay down, or any command that you'd ask a dog to do. You always make sure that you have their attention. If you don't have their attention, they're not going to listen to you. They're focused on
That's
something
right.
else. So I see a lot of dogs that are disengaged from the owners, and they're facing another way, and they ask their dog to sit when their dog is sniffing the ground or facing somewhere else. Dog doesn't do it. They correct their dog. The dog doesn't know what's happening, and they get very confused. One thing I talk about, I'm not sure if you talk much about this, but I notice this a lot, is people come to me, I want my dog to come when called. And I'll say to them, okay, so how often do you let your dog off leash? Oh, I never let it off leash because it won't come back.
Yeah.
So what happens is you have a dog that has no freedom. Every time the dog goes out of your sight, you call them back. Every time the dog goes in public, they've got a leash on. The very second that dog gets a little hint of freedom, they're going to run with that, and they're not going to come back because they know they're not going to get it again or for a very long time. It's like one of those things that if you see something, an opportunity, and a good example is if your favourite shop has a sale or one-day sale only, you rush in and you buy all the stuff you can because you're not going to see another sale for quite a long time.
Exactly.
The other edge of the sword is the dogs that have too much freedom. They get the run, they can do whatever they like. Every single walk is off lead. Every time they can do whatever they want. So when the owner calls them back, they're not used to coming back. So they're going to keep going away and not come back when called. I think one of the biggest issues I see with training recall is the fact that people don't train what I like to call real life dog training or real world dog training, which is you see people training at some obedience clubs in some places where they train recall with the dog sitting down somewhere and then come when called. They neglect the actual real life recall, which is training the dog with distractions, with other dogs in certain environments, and not just at home, not just at the park, but everywhere that you can think of to help that dog learn to recall.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I know you have your boot camps and the thing as well, and I've got the dog ranch down in Wellington, and we practice, and I'm sure you do as well, we practice as much as we can real world situations, obviously in a controlled environment. So, we'll have a group of dogs, we'll let off 5 or 6 dogs to just roam around, and one at a time, each owner or handler or whatever you want to call it has to get their dog back. So it just gives them an opportunity to be distracted while, so we practice those triggers and those responses that we're looking to build up.
With recall, it's one of those things that you do want to make sure that you reward your dog more often when it comes back than not. A lot of people don't realise what a punishment or something is for a dog when it comes back to, and I'll give you a few examples that people might not have thought of. Is they call their dog back to them, and they put a leash on and they take their dog away from the park. Or they call their dog back to them and they put a leash on to keep them under control because there's another dog coming or something like that. Or if they call their dog back and their dog does not listen to them, and then when the dog finally comes back, they then yell at the dog or scold the dog or punish the dog because it didn't come back the first time. And all those things are key things you should never ever do when you're recalling a dog.
All those things are really important, of course, but and it goes back to what I was saying before about all the too much vocal stuff. And you mentioned as well with the names. A lot of people use their dog's name for a lot of different things. Be it to get them to come back, to get them to to do this and that. And then one big thing, and I always say this is a bad thing, is that they use the name as a discipline or a correction, if you will. So when they've got their head in the garbage bin or something, my dog's name is Gus. So they would go, oh, Gus, no, or whatever it is. So that's going to confuse your recall practice as well if you've gotten into a habit of doing those sorts of things, which is something, again, that we have to be very wary of.
Yeah, dogs themselves are very complex, and if you study dogs the way we have, you'd understand that dogs are very, very complex, but for the average pet owner or the average dog handler, I would say, dogs are very simple. They need simple terms, simple words. They can't understand English or the way we speak, but they can pick up on nuances and they can understand the associations with certain words. So a lot of people will train recall, and sometimes they'll say come, sometimes they'll say here, sometimes they'll say, Gus, come here right now. And it's very confusing to a dog. It's very important to keep your recall command and all commands very, very quick. One of the reasons why I don't like using a dog's name, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with people that choose to do this, but the reason why I choose not to use my dog's name for recall is if I see my dog is in a situation, let's say I'm across the road and my dog's across the road and I see a car coming or a train or a tram, and I call out to my dog, and then he thinks that name is recall, and he runs across the road and gets hit by a car. It's much safer for me to say, Sergeant, down, and then he lays down, and then I can go and rescue him and make sure he stays safe.
That's right. Well, it goes back to what you were saying, is that it should really just be an attention grabber rather than a command, you know. And I guess you could argue that getting their attention and making them watch you is a command in itself.
With the recall command, it's important to make sure you train in different spots, not just the same spot every week. Dogs are very situational, and they don't often generalize. So it's important that if you do train recall in the home, that you also train it out of the home, and you also train it at the park, at anywhere your dog is likely to need to learn. And one thing we haven't touched on now, and it definitely is never too late to train recall. You can train recall at any age, doesn't matter how old it is. But it will always be better to train from a young puppy upwards, because you have a clean slate and you have a dog that is not confused and can learn from, you know, whatever you decide to teach it.
And it does touch on what you mentioned earlier. I mean, it's that whole, you know, if you never let them do it, and, you know, you wait your 18 months or whatever it is and think, oh, right, well, maybe I can start training this sort of stuff now, you are going to have a dog that's more than excited to get off that lead and do a run and all that sort of stuff, and that puts you in the frantic state of mind and all these sorts of things. So, you know, it is better when they're younger and they don't have as much, be it courage, you know, curiosity to go too far away. They learn how to stay in the vicinity and keep an eye on you and do all those sorts of things when they're young, and they don't have as much of an impulse to run. And it just becomes, I guess, less exciting. I mean, going to the beach or going to the warehouse is never not going to be exciting. But, you know, if they've never done it before and you take them down there and unclip that lead, well, you better believe they're going to run around pretty crazily for the first 10 or 15 minutes, and that might be pretty far away from you as well if you've never practiced it before.
Dog training in itself is not, it doesn't take very long to train a dog. It's not a long, drawn-out process every day. It's 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there.
That's right.
You can train recall when it's dinner time. You can train recall in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening. If you do enough in enough places and you make the motivation to come back to you high enough, the dog will come back every time.
Making sure that even, you know, and I always say it's a bit of exaggeration, but even if it takes 10 minutes for them to come back and you've been, you know, doing the right things and all these sorts of things, I would imagine that you would have fixed the problem by then. But even if it takes that long, you still got to give them that good dog when they get back, which is, you know, sometimes the frustrating and trying part for a lot of people who, again, their patience. Dogs will always teach you good patience, that's for sure.
I always train recall when our clients come to me and say, I want my dog to come when called. I always train on the shortest leash possible, something like 1.5 meters or 2 meters. And I make sure that dog must come back to them 100% of the time, or at least 90% of the time, before we even progress to the next level, which is a longer lead. If that dog doesn't come back, or they can't get that dog's attention at 2 meters, it's never going to happen at a longer range. I think it's important. I think it's important to mention that for dog training, you can't have the best results unless you put the effort in. If you see those dogs that are really well trained, the ones that can do a million tricks, and the ones that can, you know, recall under any distraction and those sort of things, or even protection dogs, it all takes time to train them. It's not something that happens overnight. Someone has put the effort into that dog. Some dogs, yes, will learn quicker than others. Some breeds will learn certain skills quicker than others.
Correct.
For the most part, you put the effort in and you'll get the effort out.
Oh, yeah.
I would say 100% of the people that talk to me about lack of recall are very scared, if not ever, let their dogs off lead. And when I say off lead, even at an enclosed dog park or in a tennis courts where it's controlled, they're still scared to let the dog out in case it jumps the fence or somehow escapes.
And that, you know, again, that's sort of, I guess that's something we'll touch on in the next little part of the conversation, is the leadership stuff. You know, it's all part of it. That's actually a tool in recall as well. You know, the fact of whether you're in the leadership position, all that sort of stuff, and you know, making sure that, like I said, it's just time, consistency, and setting up your triggers and your cues, making sure that they understand what they're supposed to be doing, and we're communicating what we want properly.
Definitely. What do you see as leadership with a dog?
Well, look, leadership, and again, this is probably, I imagine, for some, dog trainer people and all those sorts of things out there, they almost want to be a partnership with the dog and all those sorts of things, and that's fine if it works for you. But again, leadership, I feel it's an important part of being, part of having a dog. It's something that's the position you want to be in. Definitely, you want to be in that driver's seat, so you're pulling the strings and making the calls, so to speak. But basically, look, leadership to me is really it's a very blanket word, but I think it really comes down to making sure that you're aware of yourself. If your presence and your output, making sure that you're not doing things to excitedly or too frustratedly or with anger or sort of, trying to rush through things and stuff like this. I mean, we have to be a good role model for our dogs, if you want to put it like that, in order for them to want to follow us, and I think that's the main part about all of that is that if you're a good leader, then they will want to follow, the whole kind of human-dog relationship right there. But you got to work on that, and it requires people to work on themselves, not just as much as their dogs,
I hear a lot of people say that leadership, it's one of those things in the dog training industry that no one really understands in a certain way. They all have their own way of what leadership is. Some believe that loving their dog is a sign of leadership. Some believe that walking their dog every day is a sign of leadership. Some people think you have to walk through the door first as a sign of leadership. And in reality, the main thing with leadership for me is that your dog knows that you have control, and they know they can rely on you for safety, they can rely on you for food, and they can rely on you to take care of everything else. Now, I say that lightly, but what I mean by that, if loving a dog was all you needed, then we'd both be out of jobs, because everyone loves their dog. Every single person on the planet loves their animals, yet they still have problems. But not every dog has problems. Only some dogs have problems. Only some dogs with some owners have problems. So the common denominator there is that humans are the ones that are creating problems in dogs that weren't there. If you think about when you get a puppy, they're born wild, and then we domesticate them in our home. Some people will disagree with that and say they're born domesticated, but I've worked with plenty of aggressive dogs and very young puppies that haven't had socialization, so they're not born. In my opinion, they're not born domesticated. We domesticate them when we bring them into our house and look after them.
They have to learn our ways. Yeah, otherwise they would go into a different way. They're very susceptible to learning in any case at that age.
Definitely. And with dogs, definitely treating them like dogs and like animals before you treat them like humans is really important. Every single case that I work with where the owner has lack of control over the dog is due to humanizing the dog in some way, whether they talk to the dog to calm them down, or they talk to the dog in a certain way and the dog's not listening, or they're yelling at the dog when it's barking and the dog doesn't stop barking. In every case, it's just a bad case of humanizing. Humanizing is one of the worst things you can do, and it's a cause for a lot of deaths in pounds and shelters all around Australia. And people, that's a bold statement. I know for a fact that a lot of dogs, or more so dogs, are put to sleep due to lack of socialization and lack of training every single day. Things like making sure you walk your dog every day is important. I'm a big believer of making sure the dogs are not pulling on the lead. Now, there is some skeptical as to whether pulling on the lead is showing dominance or whether it's just a dog trying to get to what's in front and those sort of things. But either way, what I'm looking at is the dog is disengaged with the owner. If the owner puts the lead down, the dog would keep going and would never look back. So I'm not too fussed personally whether the dog's in front or behind, as long as the lead stays loose and the dog is engaged with the owner during the walk.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what I care about.
Well, I always say to people, the old fish swim, birds fly, and dogs walk. But you have to lead that walk for them, and that comes back to the whole in front or behind sort of deal there. For me, and again, it's only my personal opinion, but for me, the person or the being out in front, be it a dog or a human, is generally perceived by the pack. If you have multiple dogs, and I think people do around our town at least, if the one out in front is basically leading the show, so they choose the state of mind and they dictate the pace of that walk. So basically, again, they're not necessarily looking to you for anything. They're charging along, making their own rules, and if they want to stop and pee here, I want to sniff here, I want to do that, and all these things are fine to allow your dog to do as long as you're, somewhat in control of those situations and scenarios.
Yeah. How do you feel about dogs sleeping in beds?
Well, with me, and I always say to people, and the whole leadership deal there is I'm not trying to make anybody into a drill sergeant when I come around to their house and teach them how to do this and that. And I certainly mention things like firmness and dominance and corrections and all these things that, you see their eyes open up just a little bit wider and you go, because, it's my little baby and, he sleeps under the covers with me and all this. And I share time on the couch with my own dogs. I'm not even against that. But at the same time, you have to be the one who initiates any behavior that your dog is allowed to do around you, and it comes down to controlling your space and making sure that they see you as an authority figure and not a friend first. And it's, again, it's not, you don't have to have a million rules, but the rules that you do have, you have to have those set, and you have to be consistent with them. So with the whole jumping up on the bed thing, or sitting on the couch or whatever it is, I don't mind as long as you invite it. If you sit down on the couch and 0.1 of a second after your bum hits the couch, there's a dog in your lap, or all these sorts of things, that's probably not that cool. And again, it's with a submissive, little dog, or a nice Labrador or something. It may not be a massive problem, and you might not ever see any issues from it. But it probably does indicate that the dog's still somewhat trying to control the household, or trying to just show that it's somewhat powerful. And then, but if you're going to have a house full of staffies, or a house full of Rottweilers or Mastiffs or something like this, I mean, you're not necessarily going to want a Mastiff in your bed or on your couch anyway. But, powerful breed dogs, I'm talking about Shepherds and things like this, you might come into a little bit of trouble with the dominance and things like this, because it's a game that they like to play. And if you aren't even just a little bit aware of that, and this comes down to, dogs putting their feet on you, or leaning up against you, or jumping up, just putting their hands on, I've got big dogs, so they come up trying to put their hands on your chest, but, other things are just clamber at your legs and all those sorts of things. They're all subtle dominant things. And I think that if we're a little bit more aware of those little body language cues and things like this, then, they tend to stop asking questions so much, and you take the leadership position, and you're on autopilot for the rest of the time there, because they know their position in the pack, and they know all that sort of stuff. But for me, I think I got away from the question a little bit there, but anything is allowed if you allow it in the house. I always say that to people. If you want to have them on the couch or in the bed, or cradle them like a baby, or read them a book, I don't even mind what you do, but you have to be the one who initiates the behaviour or the situation. Otherwise, I think that it can lead to them thinking that they have a little bit more power than they should, and that can cause trouble. And that, in turn, that can cause pulling on the lead, or barking at the door, or nipping strangers, or not allowing people near you while you're on the couch or in your bed. I've had quite a few people I've spent a fair bit of time in bedrooms over the time of my dog training sort of time here. It's, people will say, oh, when I'm in bed, my little dog won't let anybody near me, sort of thing. They come charging out thinking because he's claiming. And that, again, it means that you have to initiating behaviours, otherwise they can start claiming things, jumping up on the bed and strutting around like it's theirs, and then it's possessiveness. They tend to think, well, you're not going to claim this, so I will, and then it becomes theirs, and then you have a really hard time getting off it. So yeah, look, I'm not against dogs being on the bed, but I think there has to be rules and sort of specifications for it, if you will. It can't just be allowed whenever they choose it.
I've got a similar belief to that, and I don't disagree with anything you've said at all. My belief is the fact that if you have a well-trained dog, and a dog that listens to you, and there's no such issues there, and you allow certain things like dogs in the bed, or dogs jumping up, all those sort of things, and I don't see a perceived issue with that. It's just that in every case where I've worked with where dogs have been in the bed, there's been a lack of leadership, and there has been issues caused by lack of leadership in the household. And in most cases, removing the dog from the bedroom has been one of the fixes that we've had to do to fix some of these issues.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Dogs are pack animals, and they do think such ways. And if we humanize them too much, and we bring them into our house and treat them too much like four-legged kids, they're going to treat us like dogs, essentially.
That's right.
And
yeah.
we're going to get the discipline from them. And this is the big issue I work with, is a lot of dogs that I work with every day that are quite large and big breed dogs are much, much more respected than the little tiny, Jack Russell Terriers and those sort of things that have mostly complex issues, because people seem to ignore them because they're either cute, or because you can push the dog aside if it growls at you, whereas if a Rottweiler growls at you, you're not going to get out of hand. So it's one of those things that you should show leadership to every kind of dog, not just white fluffy dogs, not just German Shepherds, but every dog that you have, you need to have an establishment of leadership. Everything that dogs do is based on instincts and based on control. And if they can't control a situation, they feel anxious. And when they get anxious, they act out in certain ways, like destructive behaviours, barking, growling, panting, all those sort of anxious behaviours that we talk about. If they understand that someone such as the owner has control, and they can go back and just chill out and just be dogs, that's essentially what they want. More dogs are born to be followers than born to be leaders. That's important.
And, and I think I'm sure that's the same thing with the relationship that you would have with your dog. I'm sure is and it's the only way I can take. Gus comes along with me, and he's kind of my crash test dummy. I call him sometimes. We go into some pretty hectic situations me and him. But and it comes down to the fact that he trusts me. He feels secure. He knows that I'm not going to. I mean, quite frankly, I am putting him in a bit of a sketchy situation, but he knows I'm in control. And he trusts that I'll control the situation. So he doesn't feel like I have to. All he's got to do is sit back there and just wait and take my cues and my leadership and trust. That's really what I think it boils down to is building trust and respect. And if you don't necessarily ask for a lot of respect or anything like that, you'll get the love, but you won't necessarily get the respect. And that's when people start having trouble with their recall, or they're having trouble with their, socialization and things like this. And it's like, well, what do they do it? It's because, they know that they love you and they know that, you'll give them their food at the end of the day and they'll do all those sorts of things, but you don't ever ask for any sort of work. There's a little bowl of food out for them every day and they don't have to do too much for that. And, there's toys and treats and things hanging around everywhere, and then you go to ask them to do something, it's kind of like, meh, I'll do something else, and then maybe I'll do it for you if there's no distractions, or, we're in the right situation, or all these sorts of things. So, again, this is why I mentioned before, you want to be an authority figure before you're a friend. And that doesn't mean being a drill sergeant, but, you got to be firm about things. We never want to be cruel or nasty, but you got to make sure they know the rules.
Yeah, definitely. And creating leadership can be as easy as just working your dog and having scheduled training sessions every day. So instead of waiting for opportunities to arise, you set aside 10 or 15 minutes every day and you spend some time with your dog and teach them to sit, to lay down. Even if your dog knows these fluently and does them without hitch, it's still important to keep reminding the dog and to keep letting the dog know and have some training sessions set aside. And you can also teach new things, but one of the best ways to establish leadership is through training and through trick training and through just general obedience training. You can establish a lot of leadership through that, just getting the dog to listen to you. Once the problem, and I've identified this issue a little bit from the clients over the last week, is that they give their dogs so many toys and so many perks, so that the dog is not. You pull out a toy and the dog looks at it like it's nothing. There's no drive there, and there's no motivation and no passion. So it makes it really hard to train a dog when you haven't got something the dog really, really wants. I think it's important to lessen the toys that you give a dog in the situations I've seen, and have a toy, one or two toys aside that you only bring out when you come out with a dog, and make them build their drive for that toy and make them really, really want it, because it will make it much easier to train them. With Sergeant, it's a tug of war, and with Holly, it's tug of war as well, but she loves tug of war with a tennis ball. So she doesn't get those things unless I'm around. But when I bring them out, they will do anything for me, and I can establish these, and I can get them to do whatever I want, obedience way, and train them. And they get a reward, which is their favourite reward every single time. If I was to leave those toys with them all the time, and then I ask them to do something, and their reward is something they've already got, and they'll get when they go back outside, they're less inclined to bother doing anything for me. They're not going to do something for me just because. Yeah,
that's right.
I talk about this all the time. A famous dog trainer once told me that dogs are selfish animals, and the quicker that we learn that, the more you'll get out of your dog, and the better dog trainer you'll be. And what I meant by that was that everything a dog does is because they get something out of it. If they like to be pat, it's because they like it. If they sit on your lap when you're sad, it's because they get something out of it. If a dog is being pet by someone else and that dog sees someone or a dog being pet, they're going to come and they know if they remove that other dog from the situation, then they will get pet. Now, a lot of people say that as a sign of jealousy, but jealousy is not. It's too much of a complex thought for dogs to have. But they do see something they want and they go and get it. So specifically with dogs, if you want to get them to do something, you must have something in it for them. If there's nothing for them, more often than not, they're gonna refuse to do it and just not do anything for them. And by being that person that can offer that thing for them, makes you, in their eyes, seem very, very important. And they won't want to lose it. Then they're gonna do more things for you because they know they need to rely on you, but not become over-dependent on you.
That's right. And then that's your recall drill right there. If you've got that nailed, recall should be pretty easy.
All right, I think we'll end it there. We've just run out of time, so thank you for joining me today, Jimmy.
Good on you, mate. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Well, there we have it, another episode of Canine Chat. Thanks for joining us today, Jimmy. I look forward to working with you in the future. For those who would like to keep up to date on my page, please head over to facebook.com/Paul the Dog Trainer and hit like, or alternatively, head over to my website at www.paulthedogtrainer.com.au.